Good morning. All right, I know it's early, but let's try that one more time. Good morning. Oh, perfect. I think we're warmed up now. As Mark mentioned, my name is Johnston. I am so excited to be here today. Before we get started, though, in our presentation, I want to tell a super quick story. So yesterday was a travel day for me. I am not from the Texas area, so I had to travel in. Flight, smooth sailing. Not a single issue, which is unusual for some airlines. Where I had some problems, though, was getting from Dallas-Fort Worth to this area. That 20-mile stretch was so much more complicated than I could have even imagined. I'll spare the detail on what actually happened, but I met a whole lot of new friends from Texas that have helped me get here today. And as I was on the side of the road, the first friend pulls up, and I get in the tow truck, and he starts asking me about where I'm from, because I'm carrying a suitcase with me, so I'm clearly not from this area. And I tell him, and he goes, "Oh, well, good thing. We're having some cool weather." And I thought, So I parted ways with that friend, and I had to meet another friend to help me on my journey. And I get in, and he starts to ask me again, "Where are you from?" He was like, "Oh, we're having some cool weather." And I started thinking, I was like, I've been outside. I pull up my phone, and it is 95 degrees. On what planet is this cool weather? Well, spoiler alert, it's Earth and it's Texas. But cool weather to me is a little bit different. So I live in Northern Virginia, and we are sliding into pumpkin spice latte season, aka fall. And we are having some cool weather, which is 60 degrees in the mornings. So who's right? Am I right that 60 degrees is cool? Are my new friends right that 95 degrees is cool? The answer is neither of us, because it's all about perspective. My perspective is different because of the area that I come from than my new friends' perspective. But at the end of the day, we see the world through different lenses, therefore we have different perspectives. And that's very much like this conference today, is that you are going to have the opportunity to hear so many different perspectives. You may agree with some of those perspectives, you may not agree with some of those perspectives, but that's what makes this conference so amazing, is that you have the opportunity to lean into perspectives that you may not understand or agree with, and just take that in and have it help you shape your perspective. So I'm excited to share with you my perspective on FinOps. And we'll talk a little bit about why I'm talking about FinOps in a moment here, but I'm excited to share it with you. So a little bit of a roadmap as to where we're headed. Some housekeeping. I'll talk a little bit about Capital One, super brief. I'll talk a little bit about our journey, our keys to success. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about a day in the life, so you can see how this actually feels to our engineers. Then I'll close up with some key takeaways. So a little bit about Capital One. So we are a tech company that also happens to do banking. We have about 12,000 engineers and 12,000 people in our technology organization. Most of those are engineers. And DevOps is at the core of all the things that we do. If you can't deploy safely, if you can't deploy reliably, if you can't maintain your infrastructure, then what good is our application? So it's very much rooted at the core of all of our engineers day to day and how we think about application development. A little bit about our journey in the cloud and how we've actually matured our FinOps practice. So in 2016 is when we declared we are going to be all in the cloud. A lot of things happened. Fast forward to 2020, and that is when we closed our last data center. And here we are in 2023. As you can see, as we've sort of matured along the way, and we started out with a startup type mentality, get to the cloud. And in doing that, you have to think about how much this is going to cost. It's not free. You may be moving out of your data centers, so you're not going to have those data center costs, but it's also not free. So we had to think about our central finance. We then needed to think about our tech staffing. How do we manage this centrally? How do we make sure that our cloud bills aren't running away from us because of what we've done with our infrastructure? Now, that wasn't the end of it. Now we've got our staffing in place, but that doesn't mean that all of the things happen. What was really important to us is that we actually got support from around our technology organizations. So our divisions leaned in and said, we need to manage our cloud spend. We need to be diligent about this and not waste. From there, it grew into executive engagement. And our top down said, okay, you're right, this is costing us way too much. We need to do something about it. So we ended up with a bottoms up and a tops down approach in order to get us to where we are today. And that from Capital One as a whole, it is an enterprise priority that we keep an eye on our cloud costs and we spend on the right things, not just on cloud resources for the sake of it. So you may be asking yourselves, why are we talking about FinOps at a DevOps conference? I argue, and this is my perspective, that FinOps is part of DevOps. Now, we talk a lot about the various different principles of DevOps, but they very much have a direct correlation to things that you need to do from a FinOps standpoint. That infrastructure you maintain costs money. You need to pay attention to that. So from a discovery standpoint, have we identified the right services to use in the cloud? Or are we just using the things that are the latest and greatest for the sake of it, but also might be incredibly expensive? Choosing the right things for the right purpose that drives the right outcome is really important to think about during your discovery phase. During the plan principle, creating a financial forecast so you have an idea as to what you think it will cost is important. Continuous feedback. We were just talking about that continuous feedback. That loop on between tech, product, business, finance, and what is going on with the cloud infrastructure from a cost standpoint is incredibly important. At Capital One, that is something that we do at least monthly with all of our teams, that there's awareness into what that forecast is, what your actual spend has been, and taking into account various different opportunities for optimization. Observe, being aware of what you're spending in the cloud. Sometimes that's step one, is just that awareness standpoint, but also continuing to look at it month over month, week over week, looking for changes, looking for differences that may need to go back into your plan, may need to go back into your forecast. And then operate. Optimization in the cloud is incredibly important. What you put out there on day one is most likely not going to be what's out there on day 65. Taking into account things that you learn, sprint over sprint, deployment over deployment, feeding that back into your plan, taking those continuous improvement feedback principles into play, helps you figure out what is the right way to do this and how do you only have to maintain what you need. So there's a few pillars at Capital One that we really operate behind, that these are the core tenets to our practice. People. People are at the heart of everything that we do. We like to think that the cloud is infinite, and it's not infinite, but it surely can scale. But it's the people behind it that make those things, that make those applications. Investing in the right people, investing in the right talent, investing in the right skills is key for us. Architecture and standards. We were in a space at Capital One where we were in a continuous remediation phase. If I could do a quick show of hands, how many people here like doing remediation in production? Okay, there's a couple. But for us, the easier place to introduce principles is actually during the architecture phase, so that you don't have to do remediation activities after you've already deployed to production. Tooling. We wouldn't be anywhere without our tooling. Especially if you operate at scale, having the right tooling allows you to have the right insights. You know, sometimes looking for opportunities is like finding a needle in a haystack. You can dig and dig and dig, head down these rabbit holes, head down other rabbit holes, and find nothing. But with the right tooling, it brings to surface the right insights for you to action. And analytics and modeling. We use a lot of machine learning to look at what, based off of our historical trends, what will the future for us look like? What does normal look like? Normal might not actually look like what today looks like, but based on the past, we can have an idea as to what the future should look like. So with that analytics and modeling, it helps us get insights into what isn't yet, but will be tomorrow. These 4 principles have been what has been our root for our program and given us the right skills, capabilities to take this forward and optimize our cloud infrastructure. So there's been a few keys to our success with FinOps at Capital One. And the first one is automation. That's something that we invested in from the start, especially when we realized the scale that we needed to operate at. Without automation, as I mentioned before, we'd be looking for those needle in a haystacks, depending on individual engineers in order to find, in order to know what their spend is, in order to figure out where their optimizations were. Doing that in a decentralized, federated way would not have set us up for success. So optimization, figuring out where those recommendations are at scale, has been key for us. Also from a budget to spend standpoint, one of the best practices that we are instilling is that you create that budget, as we talked about that, it's during that plan phase, and then you monitor, you observe your spend according to that budget. We've implemented automation to collect that data from our systems, so our engineers don't need to go and look at their individual systems. We collect it at scale, aggregate, and then show that back. And then finally, how do you know when something looks funny? How do you know that it's looked funny and it wasn't something that was predicted? So we detect that, as I mentioned, through our machine learning models. So did we expect this to happen? Not just as humans, but the system performance show us that this was coming. If not, alert. Bring it to our attention so I don't have to go looking for it. So this automation principle has been something that has been incredibly important to us as we've moved forward in our FinOps journey. The second key to our success has been partnerships. When we first started this journey, it was primarily just technology driving this. It was us from a central tech standpoint, hammering our DevOps team saying, cost matters, and having this mantra. And they're like, yes, we agree, but there's nothing more that I can do for you because I don't have capacity to do anything more. When we brought together our technology teams, our business teams, and our finance teams together at the same table to have the conversation, it was almost like an aha moment. A light bulb had gone off, and we are all finally talking the same language. Once we were able to do that, we got the right buy-in to prioritize even just spend awareness, and what can we do about that spend came next. Our third key has been integration into our engineering BAU. shouldn't surprise you at all, but when we were developing our tools that required engineers to pull the information from them, not a whole lot happened. Folks just didn't pull that information. It's not because they don't want to or because teams didn't care. It was because there's so much information coming at our teams that the easier it is to receive that information into existing processes, the better it was. So there's a couple of things that we've done to integrate into our engineering BAU so that teams don't have to go looking for information, it just comes to them. The first one being an email that gets pushed every month now. We aggregate spend. We look at, for an engineering lead that may own more than one application, they may have to care about more than one set of finances. We aggregate that and push that to them via email on a monthly basis, and it's the same time every month so that they know to expect it. We roll that up through the hierarchy so the VP of that group also knows what their spend is and has the right insights into what to do about it. Additionally, we've been talking about detecting anomalies when things go wrong. We can do that on the fly in many cases. When we detect those, we can now push Slack alerts. We could say, your spend last week was X. It is 2X this week, and push that to you. That way you know that there is something going on to take a look at. Now, maybe you expect that, and that's great. You say, yep, got it. But maybe you didn't, and that something has gone awry in your life cycle, and you want to go take a look at it. So integrating into where our engineers are already has been key for us. Then my fourth key to success here has been talent. Thinking about skills and culture. From a skills standpoint, it's been important for us to not just invest in the skills of our engineers on our FinOps team, but all of the engineers across the organization. We've embodied a model that allows us to have champions in each of the organizations, but that's still not enough. That does not scale. So figuring out what the right education components are, how do we get into education series that already exist, has been something that has worked for us. People aren't necessarily going to seek out, at least from our organization, aren't going to seek out a cloud cost training by themselves, but how do we get it into our onboarding training? How do we make it part of our quarterly training programs that we're required to take? That has helped us not just educate our teams are the ones producing it, but how do we educate the mass scale so that we're able to scale our team to get the results that we want? And then finally, from a culture standpoint, having a culture of caring about spend is really important. I don't know about all of you, but I can say from my perspective, Capital One does not have a blank check in terms of cloud costs. But in order to meet our budgetary goals, the culture around that, about regularly going in and looking at our spend, talking about our spend, implementing actions, has been part of our culture and has taken us forward. All right, so I've talked a little bit about how this works in principle, but how does it work in reality? I could say a lot of great things, but if it doesn't actually feel great to an engineer, nothing's actually going to happen. So here's the scenario. So we have Jane. So she's an engineer on one of our card teams, and she actually has accountability for 2 of our applications. They're fairly complex in nature, so she has 2 that she has to keep an eye on. She is responsible for everything tech about those applications. Everything from implementing new features, to the hygiene, to the tech stack, for modernization, maintenance, all of the things. She's responsible for that. Now, we saw at the very beginning of this that we got executive buy-in that cloud cost and optimization is a priority for us, and she hears that. So what does she do? She wants to do the right thing to help with those goals, so how does this feel to her? So the first thing that she's going to do is she's going to open up her toolbox. Now, there are many different tools that she has available to her. Not all of them are going to be used in every scenario, but she's going to see what's in the toolbox that she can take a look at. First one is understanding her cloud usage and her cost. We have tools that allow her to do that. She said, okay, I know that's what I need to go look at. Benchmarking, how has my cost been over the year? We have tools that we're going to look at to see that. You can make some decisions. She is probably not going to do some rate optimization. That's something that I'll handle centrally. Optimization, her usage optimization, we're going to see how she's going to do that. And her organizational alignment, that's bringing together at the same table not only her teams, but with her business, product, and finance partners. So she has a lot available to her in our toolbox, so she's actually ready to get started. She has a plan. So the first thing that she's going to do is she's going to go look for the email that got sent to her. So we can see that there's two applications, application 1 and application 2. And oh gosh, she sees that her spend efficiency has dropped. Now, the spend efficiency is something we've developed internally that says, are you using your cloud resources for good or do you have waste? That's the crux of it. So she sees that in the last month, it's gone down, which isn't the right direction. She can see that from a budget standpoint, she's got some overages. So now she's like, okay, I know I need to take some action. And she can kind of see where the problems are within her individual applications. All right, so she said, I need to figure out what opportunities are there. So she's going to go to our tool. There was a link on the previous slide towards the bottom, it was kind of on the right-hand side that she just clicks. And it takes her to a tool that says, we've done some aggregation, we've crunched your numbers, and here are where your opportunities are. Now, we don't expect Jane to just say, yep, do, done. We expect her to take a look at it. When you're aggregating at such scale, your ability to be precise is slightly diminished, but at least gets you in the right direction. So looking at the screen here, she knows there's some EC2 right-sizing opportunities. Perhaps one of her team members changed their infrastructure as code to use more powerful EC2s unintentionally. Something from another environment potentially got deployed to production. So she sees, okay, here's where the problem is. But also I need to think about the past. What has my spend looked like so I know what good looks like? So she goes to our tool that shows her what her spend is. She can see everything is looking steady and up. Last month I had that uptick. This is a good benchmarking activity so she knows what good looks like as well as she has a point of reference to come back to once she makes some changes. All right, so she made her changes. I'm not going to go through that. She fixed her infrastructure as code. She right-sized her EC2s. Next month comes along, and she sees the benefit. She sees from her spend standpoint, the trend came back down to what she expected. She sees her spend efficiency go back up to what she expected, and she's on the right track. This is the process that our engineers go through each month, and it is pushed to them. It is talked about in our tech, finance, business, product circles. And all of those teams at that table have access to these tools, so they also help keep each other accountable. It's important that we're only deploying what we need, only maintaining what we need. We are modernizing. We're doing what we need to do in order to keep our cloud costs in check. So there's just a few key takeaways I hope that you all take from this presentation is one, if you're building a FinOps team, build for what you need today, but also think about what you need for tomorrow. Everything that we went through here wasn't built on day one. It has taken us several years to mature. But when we were day one, we put in place a maturity journey that got us here, thinking about how we needed to grow, how we needed to educate, and how we needed to provide optimization recommendations to our teams so it was easy. The second one is to make it easy. As I mentioned before, when we had our tools out there, teams were not pulling the information from them. And it's because we have so many different tools, and I'm sure many companies are like that too. So many different types of information that's out there. You can only take in so much that you have to seek out. But if you integrate it into existing ways of doing things, it will be easy for your engineering teams to do that. And then finally, measure what matters. I'll go back here real quick here. When we were looking at this slide here, there's only a few numbers on this slide. There's so much that you can measure about an application, and I'm sure many of you measure many other things about applications, but there's a lot more that we could measure from a finance standpoint that we don't, or we don't put in front of our engineers. Because if we measure everything, if we put it all on a slide, sometimes too much information is actually a bad thing. So figure out what matters most to you, what matters most to your organization, and only measure that and hold your teams to that standard. So with that, I will close. Thank you for listening to me. I hope you gained some perspective as to why finance matters, how it integrates into the DevOps principles, and I hope you gained some additional perspective throughout the day. We might have time for a couple of questions. I don't know if there, yeah? So the question was, I mentioned mandatory required quarterly training. So we do not do mandatory required training on the cost standpoint, but we do in our enterprise. We have compliance things that we need to train our teams on quarter over quarter. That's centrally managed by our learning and development team. As part of our cost training, we're putting that in our new hire onboarding. We have a training module that we're going to just integrate into that existing process. It's things like, since we are a bank, highly regulated, it's training to make sure that we all know the rules of the road. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you. Oh, sorry, I missed you. So the question was about overhead and how much overhead we had to collect this information. We collect a lot of information on our applications as a whole, and how does that overhead compare with our savings? Is that fair? Yeah. So from an overhead standpoint, something that we were very deliberate about was not introducing new metrics collection that wasn't already being collected on our applications, quote unquote, today. So we use our APM tools in order to collect an incredible amount of data. It was primarily used for observability and resiliency purposes. We use that same data to pull into our cost tools, a different data set, but coming out of the same tools, and we can run our analytics on that. Now, from how does that compare to our cost savings? Because data, one, is expensive to produce, to consume, to analyze. The comparison between that and the value that we get from our cost savings can't even compare. It's pennies on the dollar for the overhead versus the savings because of the scale that we can get from the collection and the insight. So we primarily focus on finding some really big opportunities where there are multi-million-dollar opportunities if we fix them, and it doesn't compare to the cost of the overhead in order to collect and analyze it. Any other questions? Right? Yes, AWS is our predominant provider. Yeah, so the question was, since we are primarily on AWS, how has it looked like for using their native tools versus building our own tools? Is that the question? So today, we are primarily building our own tools. Because of our scale, initially when AWS came out with their cost tools, we had a hard time using them because they were fairly narrow, just in terms of being able to see across accounts. It didn't allow us to see our data in one place. That actually has changed, especially in the last couple of years. They've made quite a bit of investment in some of their native tooling. Something that we do on a regular basis is do that analysis, that build versus buy analysis of, is it worth it to continue creating our own tools, or should we just switch over? We've done that probably 4 times since I've been in this role. And for us, and this is very specific to us, it has been still worth it for us to use our own tools that we've developed. Now, I'd love to get to a position where we had a mix, where we had our own tools that we developed that was very specific to our needs, but we integrated with other AWS tools like Compute Optimizer to bring that data in. And some of their other tools as well that have gotten quite a bit of attention over, even the last year. Billing Conductor has looked pretty nice. But we're not in a space yet where we've done a bunch of that, but that is where I want to be. So I can scale my existing team by using some of AWS's native tools. We'll get there. All right. Well, thank you so much for your attention this morning. I hope you gain an incredible amount of new perspective from your other speakers, and I hope you have a great day.